Good evening. Tonight is Saturday, June the 20th. It's about right at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, and I haven't really checked in quite a while. And I thought for tonight's topic, we're going to talk about the new presidential planes, Airforce One, and how the story is actually coming about or came about, and the kind of behind story which you can't really see and which most people may not be familiar with it. So let me just give you a short recap on this, on how this whole deal actually started. In January 2015, the Obama White House announced they needed to order two new airplanes to replace the current 747s because of age and mileage and everything else. And so in April of 2015, Obama traveled to Seattle, Washington, I believe it was, to the Boeing headquarters, and they signed a deal. And the deal was as follows. Boeing was about ready to discontinue the 747s altogether. But as chance and luck may would have had it, there was a Russian airline which had placed an order at the very end while they were still in production for two 747s-8. The Dash 8 is basically the biggest version of all of them in length and size, passenger carrying capabilities, and freight, or amount of freight which can be carried, and so far and so on. And it is the I version, which is the intercontinental version, meaning normally we use the term ER, which is extended range, and it means you can fly farther, like 8,000 miles or something like this without refueling, which is enough to fly from here to Japan, or from here, to Europe and other places, or to the Middle East, or what have you. So you have quite some range there with 8,000 miles. Anyway, the Russian airline never took the delivery of these two aircraft, and to my understanding is they were nearing completion. They were not fully completed yet. Those were basically the last ones which were rolling out of there in terms of 747s out of the Washington State manufacturing facility of Boeing, since they're headquartered there. And then it got fairly quiet. And in 2017, the U.S. Air Force, I believe, purchased, at that point after Obama had signed that contract originally there in April 2015, they had purchased then these two 747s for a price tag of like 3.9 billion has 9 zeros. Billions for the 3.9 billion US dollars for both of them, including the modifications which needed to be made with weapon systems they install, communication stuff, EMC, electromagnetic, resistance, and special paint, and this, that, and the other thing. Anyway, so in 2017, this was just the time when President Trump had taken, was sworn in shortly thereafter. And I guess the only objection President Trump had at that time was the contract itself, with the ability for Boeing to have cost overruns. So it would be naturally that these airplanes would be by far more expensive. At that point in 2015, Obama had negotiated a contract that the airplanes should have been delivered by like 2023, 2024. In 2020, when it got closer for the Boeing people to start modifications and stuff like this, just shortly, I think it was just shortly before the COVID thing came loose, they turned loose on us. Biden, no, not Biden, President Trump went to Boeing and renegotiated the contract, and he put a cap on the dollar amount. I think they froze that at $3.9 billion. And then came COVID, which stalled the further progress, and Biden got into the office. So Biden never pushed it, but Biden never renegotiated the deal or authorized any additional funding. So Boeing came then, I think by 2023, they said these planes are not going to be ready. And we are now at a cost overrun by another $1.1 billion. So they're like at $5 billion now for these two aircraft. And they're not nearly completed for a host of variety of issues. For one is the Pentagon or the government is investigating Boeing because they had 250 people working on these aircraft which did not have security clearances, for this to work on top secret projects like this, which this is. And there were another issue. There was one of the main parts source or subcontractors or parts vendor to Boeing went bankrupt, and they still cannot get any replacement parts and so far and so on. So this entire thing is at the moment pretty much shut dead in the water. And I don't even think that these two aircraft will be done by 2028 or 2029. This is kind of completely in the nowhere land, kind of somewhere in there where no one knows exactly if that's going to materialize. So now Trump comes in, he looks at this deal, he gets now the briefing on it, so he knows exactly where it is at, and he gets now Qatar, or the king over there, to donate this aircraft for $400 million. Okay, so they go with this thing, and he is supposed to be taking that airplane then with him for the presidential library he's going to build sometime down the road. Something like this is the story. Now, the story which has not been really told in the media is that the U.S. Air Force went out now and bought two used aircraft 747A 8I from Lufthansa, which Lufthansa no longer is going to use, but which still are fully airworthy and they can be flown. One they're going to use to train the crew on one of them. The other one, the older one of the two, will be stored and then used as parts department because, like I said, is that parts vendor to Boeing went bankrupt. One of their main one. Whatever parts they were making are no longer available for this type of aircraft. So they bought two of them, and they're currently leasing a 747-8I from Atlas Cargo, and that serves as a training aircraft for the pilots. So the U.S. Air Force pilots, which are flying the current 747s, have to be type rated for the new version, for the Dash 8I. And they have to undergo training, and then they have to do a check ride, and they have to get not just a simulator time, but they actually have to fly in an aircraft to get the full type rating for these aircrafts. And I don't know how many U.S. Air Force pilots are dedicated to that team, but there's going to be quite a few of them. And so this is now the strategy. So we have now a total, the U.S. government has now the two ones which were the original ones, which standing at Boeing at one of the hangars, waiting to be finished one day, where they either can get parts or can get not parts, or who knows what the story is going to be there. At a point now, I think the government has paid already $1 billion or more for these two aircraft. We got the one from Qatar, I believe it was from the king over there, for free. And then they bought the two Lufthansa jets. I think they spent 400 million on those two, 200 million each. So 400 million on that. So we have now, the US government owns now 5 of these aircraft, of these Dash 8I, where only one is, or two of them are fully airworthy and can fly and do something. And the new one, which was the donated one, has now gotten the color scheme. And the U.S. Air Force, together with L3 Communication in Texas, have converted this entire aircraft over to the particular communications they need. But certain weapons and stuff was not installed. This is all classified information, so I can tell you only what they have released and what they have not released. But at this point, there's not much in there. They have actually given us, but this aircraft is going to start service next month by July 4th, by the 250th anniversary, and then it will transport President Trump. I guess it will be safe enough for them that they all feel comfortable that they can execute all of the stuff. And I guess the secondary, the decoy or the secondary 747 is going to be one of the Lufthansa ones, which they're going to convert over, and it's going to look then exactly the same as the one from Qatar, which was, presented yesterday with the new color scheme. And I think the color scheme looks great. I think that is a great aircraft they got there. And of course, having it donated that way, it was probably easier. In a democracy, when you have like a body like Congress which has to approve these kind of purchases, which they did for the two original airplanes, if you were to present them a democratic body like this, with to vote on the cost and the payment of this, if you tell them you're going to turn them into some flying palace out of 1,001 Night, story, they're probably going to say thank you, but no thank you. And they said, we're just going to have a regular interior, just a little bit better, but nothing that spectacular was what Trump got now out of Qatar from the king, because he had no limits on what he could do with his airplanes since he bought this over there. So in this case, we got lucky that we got something like this circumventing sort of the democratic process. But then on the other hand, the taxpayer didn't have to pay for the interior of this aircraft. They didn't have to pay anything for the aircraft, really. And I'm pretty sure that the decoy are probably not going to be as fancy, or the second version of this, that's the Lufthansa, the converted Lufthansa one, as a backup plane, may not be exactly the same on the interior as the first one. But they might as well just go ahead and do it. Who knows? I couldn't tell you because this is all classified. But this is all the direction we're going here with this. I have heard all the critics from the safety aspect, how dangerous this is and that. Then the other thing is, the other one thing is a complete overkill. Then you have other people who just don't understand anything about it. I looked at this yesterday and I said, well, Trump did the same thing I would have done. I would have done the same thing as Trump did. If it's the same thing, you want to buy a car and you go to your car dealership and they say, well, yeah, we don't have that. We don't make that car, that model you like. We don't make that anymore. We stopped making that a couple months ago. But we have a couple cars here back from someone who never came and picked them up. And we could sell them to you maybe 10%, 20% cheaper, and you take them. I said, well, I would like to have some modifications made. I want a mini bar in there. I want a television in there. Just something like this. Then they tell me, yeah, that's going to cost so much. I said, go ahead. Then months later, I get a phone call. I said, well, the company who makes all of this stuff, and they went bankrupt, so we can't get this right now, and we're going to try to find someone else. And It's going to be more now than what we had told you when you first bought the car, and then you're going to say, you know what, if yeah, whatever, either you got to get it going or you don't. Meanwhile, I'm going to trying to find the car I want somewhere else, and if I have someone in the Middle East and in Europe who got the car and they can ship them over here, and I say, here's the money, send it over here, and then I can drive the car I want. Same story. Any private person would do that who's in the right frame of mind. Of course, I don't have to get congressional approval for it. The car's just an example. But, that's normally how this works. So if you really want something, if you can't buy it new anymore, where do you wind up going is most likely you go on eBay, trying to find it and see if you're going to have it, to find that what you wanted. Otherwise, you have to buy something of lesser quality, and you probably wind up on Amazon, and that sort of stuff. So in that sense, I would say they did the right thing. I hope this is going to work out. I think I really like the paint scheme of that aircraft. I haven't seen the interior yet because they haven't really released any pictures of this. At least not at the present state, what it was before, somewhat, some PR pictures. But other than that, I haven't seen anything. But from the outside, with the blue and the red and the white, the way this is all done, I think it's an extraordinary aircraft. And we have to realize this: America is still pretty much the most important country in a lot of aspects. If this ever is going to change, the failing empire and all of this stuff, who knows? I couldn't tell you that. I don't have a crystal ball, But this is basically the background in it. So I personally, at this point, doubt, with the information I have, is that the original two 747s 8Is, which are in Washington State, and which are owned now by the U.S. government or by the Air Force, and they are parked in the hangars waiting modification or work to be done on it, are probably never going to get finished. Who knows what's going to come out of that deal? These two aircraft may they have never really flown, and they may just become another part source to sustain the other two, the Lufthansa one and the one from Qatar. Yeah. This is how this is going. We're living in a crazy world. Now, how do you say this in English in Germany? Das Fazit, oder der Geschichte, das thing, the conclusion in this, conclusion is probably the best word of saying it. In this story is this: we have to look at Boeing. And Boeing has been, since the 1940s, possibly the mid-1930s, evolved as one of the most important aircraft manufacturer and defense manufacturer in history. And this company is falling apart at the seams. We had these crashes of the 737s, I believe 800, where they had to stop making them because there were so many issues with the software and this and the other thing. We had that Dreamliner where the nose collapsed, while it was parked at the gate in Germany just a week or 2 weeks ago. There's one thing after another. And this reflection of Boeing is a internal illness in the corporate world, in the Western corporate world. You have it in Germany, you have it in Great Britain, you have it in almost every country in the West, where there is such a discrepancy of their legacy, of what they used to be able to build, the quality, the standards the successes, and this has shrunk into a mediocre performance. This entire story I just shared with you with these five 747s, 8 eyes, they're now all owned by the government. And the reality is, Boeing cannot produce any more spare parts for these aircraft. They're incapable of buying the vendor who went bankrupt. They can find obviously anyone on Wall Street with trillions and trillions of dollars available to recapitalize the manufacturer to build parts. And there's a lack of interest in this from the finance sector over the corporate sector, the people who do mergers and acquisitions or holding companies. No one has any interest in it. We have Musk floating around out there. He tells everyone SpaceX is worth $2 trillion or $1 trillion or whatever. And he's going to be the richest guy on the planet. And if it depended on it, the guy couldn't put a fucking nail in the wall to hang a picture on it. And this is the reality of what we're facing. We have totally incapable people. They're thinking about traveling to outer space into Mars, but yet, on a real scale, one of the biggest names in aviation, in aerospace, in space technology, cannot get parts together for an aircraft they manufactured until about 8 years ago, or 10 years ago. That is the real story of what we're seeing here. All this other thing, whether this was right for Trump to do, to go to Qatar and ask for an airplane and have this donated, whether that is a flying palace as of 1001 Nights, who gives a shit? It is completely irrelevant. What is relevant is the inability of the American industrial sector to actually finish 2 aircrafts and supply them with parts and deliver them in a couple of years like they did with the first series of the 747s, which were delivered in 1990. That is the true story, and that is a reflection of everything in this country, and that has swapped over to Europe. So if you're in Germany and you're wondering on why everything is falling apart, take a real good look at Boeing, take a look at their issues they're having, their problems they're having, and their lackluster enthusiasm. There's no more enthusiasm about nothing there, and it is just, it's either going to work or it doesn't, and who cares, and we're going to go on and do something else. We're going to watch Musk with this $2 trillion SpaceX program and see where that's going to go and see how many people he's going to send up to Mars. This is food for thought. This is our reality of 2026. It is a pretty grave picture. You will see, if we really look at Boeing and the patterns and the illnesses, you will see this in almost every German company and every French company, especially the larger industrial ones which used to manufacture stuff. And you're going to see this all across in the Western world. That is the part of the end of the empire which people are talking about. I did not talk about the Ukraine tonight for one reason, because I don't have enough information. And I didn't want to bring up Iran for the very same reason. We will talk and look at these things as we get reliable information, and then we can take a closer look at this. For the moment, I wish you a good night, and I don't know if I'm going to see you before July 4th or not. If not, then I wish you, if you're here in America, a very happy July 4th, the 250th year. keep Boeing in mind and don't get too discouraged. It is pretty discouraging. It is depressing, actually, to say this at least. But we will see which direction this is all going to go. And with that, you have a good night.